You're about to meet the blade that remembers. Because this isn't just steel, it's war, it's peace. It's identity forged, folded, and reborn across centuries. And in the final minutes of this story, you'll see the sacred moment when a blade receives its soul. But before we get there, let me show you why this knife isn't just sharp, it's alive. Because to make a knife like this, one that can cut onions like air or last longer than a marriage, you need two rare things. One, incredibly pure, high-carbon steel. Two, the hands of someone who knows what to do with it. Japan has both. And this is how they kept them alive, even when the world forgot. Let's start at the source. Beneath Japan's soil, deep within the mountains, lies steel sand, one of the purest raw materials on Earth. But it's not enough to dig it up. It has to be transformed through an ancient process called Tatara, and it's brutal. Imagine working 4 days straight, no sleep. Feeding fire every hour, stirring molten steel until your hands crack from the heat. That's Tatara, and it's the only way to create Tamahagane, the kind of steel a samurai would trust his life to. This is the beginning of the blade, but it's only the beginning. Because the steel may be pure, but it's nothing without the soul. We're getting closer. Now picture this, it's the warlord era in Japan. Fierce clans rule the land, samurai guard castles, and in every town, a blacksmith. Not just any blacksmith, one who understands the weight of blood and honor, one who crafts swords for warriors who won't live to see winter. Every village had one. The swordsmith was as important as the shrine. That was the world until it disappeared, because when World War II ended, the sword was no longer needed. The steel, the skill, still there, but the war was over. And that's where this story turns, because the sword didn't die. It just changed shape. Craftsmen who once forged weapons for war started crafting tools for life. They turned their fire to peace. They made knives. His name was Takemura, 18 years old, just out of high school. The war was over. His father had learned blacksmithing during the chaos, but now he wanted to make something better, something useful. They had nothing. Japan had nothing. Cities were flat. People were hungry. Families needed tools to survive, not weapons to fight. And so the father picked up his hammer. The son joined him. A kitchen knife was born, but not just any knife. A knife built the same way swords were, by hand, with fire, folded, hammered, and sharpened until it could cut silk mid-air. They weren't just rebuilding their country. They were sharpening it. Something strange happens when you hold a handmade Japanese knife. You don't just admire it, you feel it. And once you do, there's no going back. Because that knife, it's not just a tool, it's something you look forward to using, something you might even grow attached to. Some say emotionally, even lustfully, and here's why. These blades aren't made in factories. They're made in tiny workshops, some with just a father and son. Some with an old master and 2 apprentices who hammer in rhythm like a heartbeat. Most people think that's inefficient. Why not use machines? Why not speed things up? But that's not how memory is made. See, real blacksmiths, the ones still working today, still pick up their sledgehammers. One holds the steel. 2 or 3 others hammer down in perfect timing. It's not cheap. It's not fast, but it's human. Still, some change is necessary. That's why many blacksmiths now use spring hammers, massive machines that hit hard, fast, and precise. It lets them do more, but the touch is still theirs. They still control every detail. And around Japan, 5 places keep this fire alive: Niigata, Fukui, Seki, Sakai, and Tosa, each region with its own legacy, each region with its own masters. One of them is a man named Shiba. He's not a blacksmith, he's something else, a sharpener. And according to other craftsmen, he's the best there is. They call him the Wayne Gretzky of knife sharpening. But you wouldn't know that by looking at him, because his workshop is a van. He drives around the countryside, picking up dull knives from farmers' homes, sharpening them by hand, and delivering them back the next week like a kind of magical blade postman. That's his job, and he loves it. Now here's the part most people miss. A great knife is only as good as its edge. And sharpening, real sharpening, is an art all its own. It takes hours. It takes water, it takes stone, it takes absolute focus. Takemura-san, one of the masters, can spend 10 minutes on a single knife, and that's just the beginning. There's no shortcuts here. You don't just press a button and walk away. You feel the edge, you listen to the stone, you guide it again and again and again, until that blade, once dull and lifeless, can now slice a tomato just by looking at it. But here's the problem. Most people have never felt that kind of sharpness. They grow up using dull, cheap stainless steel knives from home improvement stores. They think that's normal. They think steel doesn't rust, that it doesn't need care, that cutting is just cutting. But when you show them a real knife, a blade that glides through meat or floats through onions, their eyes widen. And in that moment, they understand what they've been missing their whole life. And they never want to go back. Stay with me, because the moment when the blade is spiritually awakened, that's still coming. But first, we need to understand how Japan nearly lost this entire craft. After the war, Japan rose fast. Factories buzzed, cities grew, and people were ready to move on. Between 1950 and 1970, the country exploded with progress. GDP doubled, technology advanced, the future was everything. But in the rush to modernize, something ancient was left behind. Traditional blacksmiths, once the pride of every village, were now seen as old-fashioned. People didn't want handmade anymore. They wanted fast. They wanted cheap. Consumer culture took over. Buy, use, throw away. Knives were no exception. You could get one at the supermarket, stainless steel, machine-made, no rust, no fuss. And so one by one the blacksmiths went quiet. Craftsmen who had spent their lives perfecting the art of forging, the art of sharpening, suddenly found themselves without customers. Some tried to keep going. Others quit entirely. They were told it wasn't worth it anymore, that no one cared. And for a time that seemed true. But something strange started to happen. People began to miss the feeling, not just of sharpness, but of connection. The connection you feel when you hold something that wasn't just made, it was crafted. People started to realize a knife made by machines cuts fine, but a knife made by hand, it cuts with intention, it becomes yours. One sharpener said, "I use the same knife every day. I take care of it, and it takes care of me. It may be more expensive, but over time it becomes cheaper. And it becomes mine." Another said, "Most people don't know what a sharp knife feels like, but once they do, they can't go back. It changes everything." That shift, small at first, became something more. The knives came back. The blacksmiths started getting letters again. Apprentices returned. And the fires, once nearly extinguished, began to glow again. But let's pause here, because everything we've talked about so far, the steel, the forging, the sharpening, it still doesn't explain why these knives feel so different. Why people say they have personality. That part, that's coming next. In the final steps of the journey, you'll witness the moment when a knife receives its soul. A ritual that can't be automated, that can't be seen in a factory, that can't even be fully explained. But once you witness it, you'll understand. Here it is, the moment we've been building toward. You've seen the steel, you've seen the fire, you've met the masters, but now we step into something deeper. Because in Japan, a knife is not finished when it's sharp, it's finished when it's alive. There's a ritual for this. It's not flashy, it's quiet, precise. Ancient, it's called Bukai, and it means more than most people will ever realize. Here's how it works. A blacksmith takes two kinds of steel, one hard, one soft, on their own. They're incomplete, too brittle, too weak. But layered together, folded again and again, they become something far greater than either could be alone. Not just functional, balanced, not just strong, resilient. Every fold traps memory. Every hammer strike adds identity. It's not just physics, it's not just metallurgy. It's storytelling told in sparks and rhythm. Some blades are patterned like flowing water. Others are plain. The look doesn't matter. What matters is how it feels. A master once said, "Even if there are no patterns, the sharpness doesn't change. But I make the patterns so people can see it with their own eyes. So they know this blade was made by someone, not something. And that changes how you use it. When you slice a vegetable, you don't just cut, you respect. When you cook, you don't just prepare, you honor. Because that knife is now part of something bigger than dinner." That's why so many blacksmiths don't call themselves artists. They call themselves craftsmen. Not because what they do isn't beautiful, it is, but because every movement has purpose. Every hammer strike is calculated. Every sharpening stroke is learned through repetition and pain. One master said, "I don't move fast, but I don't waste a moment. My feet stand in the same two places. My tools stay in the same spots. I don't need to rush, I need to feel." When you watch them work, you realize this is what usable art looks like. A thing you can hold, use, keep, pass on. It's not made to be admired. It's made to become part of your life. Some of these masters have worked for 50 years. Some are in their 70s. They don't just make knives, they teach them. In places like Knife Ridge, a facility where young apprentices can work alongside old masters, the legacy lives on. Because if you want to learn blacksmithing, you could find one old man in a garage, or you could walk into a room with 20 of them, each holding history in their hands. And that's where the future of this craft is being forged. But even with all this, it still isn't easy. Making knives is dangerous. You're surrounded by heat, sharp edges, unforgiving machines, cold dust in the air, hammers that can crush bone. You sweat beside flames. You lift heavy steel. You hammer until your arms tremble. It's brutal, but they keep going. Why? Because they know what happens in the final moment. When a blade folded, sharpened, hardened is quenched, that's when it all locks in. That's when it takes form. That's when it breathes. There's one last thing you haven't seen, the legacy. Because no matter how beautiful the blade, it's meaningless unless it's passed on. And in the final chapter, you'll meet the blacksmiths who almost quit but stayed. The sons who came home, and the reason this story might still have a future. Sometimes the fire calls you. Even when you try to walk away, some blacksmiths didn't choose the job, it chose them. One master never wanted to forge knives. He wanted a different life, a quiet one, maybe working in City Hall. But his family was full of women. No one else could carry the name, so his father brought him back. And when he stood by the fire, something in him changed. The hammer, the steel, the rhythm, it began to make sense. Now, decades later, he still doesn't say he's great. He says, I'm still learning. I don't fix every mistake, but I do my best, and that's enough. Another craftsman was in his 60s when NHK, Japan's national broadcaster, filmed him. His son, watching quietly for years, asked if he could take a picture while his father worked. That small moment became something bigger. That was the first time the son stepped into the fire. That was the first time he saw himself as a link in the chain. This is how traditions stay alive in Japan. Not through shouting, not through marketing, through watching, through quiet hands, through memory. One craftsman said, I used to be ashamed to say I was a blacksmith, but now people are starting to look again. They're starting to understand that good food comes from good knives and good knives come from heart. There was a time when craftsmanship was denied, thrown aside in favor of speed, efficiency, profit. But now, something is returning, not just the knives, but the pride. Because when people hold a handmade blade, even for the first time, something awakens in them. They feel the time, they feel the care, they feel someone else's story in their hands, and they want to tell one of their own. As one maker said, people want something beautiful, something that looks like it was made by a person. You're allowed to be drawn to beauty. And maybe that's why they keep coming back, not for the sharpness, but for the soul. You might use this knife every day. You might pass it down. You might never know the name of the person who forged it, but every time it touches your hand, you'll feel it. The rhythm, the weight, the whisper of someone who gave their life to the craft. This isn't just a knife. This is legacy. This is fire that never went out. This is the blade that remembers. This knife remembers war, peace, and everything in between. But what about the blade they tried to erase from history? Stick around.